everybody. Welcome back to Eggs Podcast. Today's special guest is Anthony Taylor of SME Strategy. Anthony, how are you, man? Welcome to the show.
What's happening, boys? I just happen to be here. Grateful to be on the show, and yeah, just excited to rock with you.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Thank you so much for making time for us. You want to give us a brief breakdown of who you are, how you got to where you're at today?
Whoa. Breakdown of how I got to where I am today. But well, really, okay, I'll tell you, I run a consulting company. We're really like a facilitation company called SME Strategy. I'm a waiter by trade. I figured out that I didn't want people to rip me off anymore. I had a guy rip me off for about $100,000, and I was working on 2 nonprofit boards that were super impactful, but disorganized as heck. And so I started SME Strategy to like help those 2 kind of use cases. And then since then, we've been doing it for 13 years, got clients all over the world, and just love helping people. And honestly, just so grateful to be on the show, to be able to like support your audience with what they're working on. So happy to be here.
Absolutely. Well, and so our audience is largely comprised of CEOs, startup founders, people like this, a lot of folks who obviously engage deeply in business strategy. But let's maybe break it down to kind of maybe the most common denominator, which might be, you know, a startup or a new business, or maybe even somebody considering going into business. What role does like business strategy, and it sounds kind of rudimentary to say this, but I want to hear you frame it. You know, what role does business strategy in the way that you guys approach it, you know, does that take shape in helping a person get going in their business, or maybe revamping their business or doing it a different way?
So let's think of like strategy at its base is like choices, right? I've got 20 things on my to-do list. I know I want to renovate my office, but I also have to manage going to the gym and doing all of that stuff. So strategy, you know, it's like, do I eat the chocolate? Do I eat the cucumber, right? Those are strategic choices. Every business organization has to go through those strategic choices. As a small startup business, you have to make a lot of those decisions fast. As you kind of grow into the like business spectrum, it becomes more complicated because of how many people you have on the team. And so you're no longer a small sailboat that can change directions just like that. You're more like an oil tanker. You have 30, 50, 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000 employees. And so those strategic choices in terms of where you spend your time, money, energy, become, well, more expensive, but also more important to make sure that they're done intentionally. And so we typically work with teams like every 3 years on like a wholesale strategic plan, but also through their implementation on, you know, day-to-day choices about how they're going to work together. So they apply at different levels. They just get more expensive as you kind of move up the chain, if that makes sense.
I like that analogy of the oil tanker. Because if you think about it, just even stopping an oil tanker is hard. So if you get momentum in the wrong direction, being able to even stop and change pace is tough. So it's really critical that you've got your course correction done way out in advance, so you can make those changes to get where you need to and stop in time, and not have a problem of running into the dock or something like that. You know, it's a cool analogy that I haven't put together before. It's kind of neat.
Well, I also just want to kind of add, or I guess compliment you for framing strategy as choices. I think that's the simplest version of what business strategy is. And for me anyway, I mean, I'm a guy that has always been a fly by the seat of my pants entrepreneur. Maybe it explains the size of my business is, you know, it hasn't been able to scale beyond, you know, a few people for that reason. But maybe a big part of that is that I've never looked at strategy as choice. Strategy has always seemed, you know, like this big overwhelming thing that you have to involve people in, and you have to prognosticate the future, and you have to know what's going to come, and you have to make all these decisions. So it becomes overwhelming and then just doesn't get done. And so, but hearing it described,
help
yeah,
with
please.
that.
Yeah, let's do it.
So let's call it strategy is the choices akin to taking a road. But the larger kind of more sneaky part that people don't think about because they're so focused on the choices is the destination. So the number one thing, and not to like, I don't want to like pitch or whatever, but I will say like we help teams with this thing called the multiple destination trap. You have all of these places that you want to get to, but instead of picking one, you spin around in circles as it relates to, you make no decision. Or if you're working on a team, different people have different ideas of what good looks like. how we think about it is like, okay, let's say we all want to go to California. Well, Mike's version of California might be like going to see a couple shows in LA. Ryan, your
That's about
version of
right.
California might be going to like Napa Valley and tasting some wine and like, going to art galleries or whatever. Mine might be going to San Diego and watching baseball. Well, if we just say, hey, let's all go to California, we're like, yeah, let's rock with it. But once we get there, or like as we're planning it, we have very different destinations. And so organizations first need to be clear about the destination. Mike, to your point around the stopping the oil tanker, are we even going to the same place in the first place? And then how do we make decisions that will either get us closer? And if we're not getting closer, then we're going further away.
Well, and to just keep that metaphor alive too, I mean, yeah, when they're planning, let's say you've loaded up your tanker ship here on the west coast of the United States and you're heading to China or something, like, I mean, which pier you're going to land on, right? So speaking
Hopefully.
in terms of like granularity, I mean, you're not just going to China,
Yeah.
to your point about California, you're not just going to, Guangdong or however you say it, you're not doing this, you're going to a specific pier at a specific port in a specific city in a specific state, country, et cetera. And I think that, the metaphor that you just gave, I think actually does resonate with me anyway, which is this notion that it's hard to know where you're going when there's so many places you want to go. Right. And I read, in reading up on you, that one of the things you had hoped to do or achieve as a goal, and maybe you have, is, to go to all the Major League Baseball stadiums in the country. And so to that extent, right, to say, hey, man, hey, Anthony, let's go to a baseball game. Okay, well, that's great. But, well, I've already been to that stadium, or I want to go to this stadium, or we're in this state, so let's go to that game, or whatever it is. So there's all these decisions to be made. And I think that maybe that's where, like, I guess for lack of a better term, goal setting falls apart for people. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about, pinning that down, and then even sort of the strategy of pivoting, which is, we need to know where we're going for one, but like, maybe you don't need to know where you're going to be in 20 years. Maybe we just need to set smaller goals, and I'll let you fill in the strategy here or how people actually should approach this. Because where I fall apart personally is I start going where I think I want to be, but then there's so many decisions between here and where I want to go that it just ends up being
nothing. Okay. Well, so I'll say I personally had a 20-year plan. So I said, hey, here's what I want to be in, and of course it didn't work out. I'm not a multi-gajillionaire that I was in like 3 years or whatever. I said, here's where I want to be. Like loosely, I want to or when I was younger, I said, hey, what do I want to do something where I can have fun and make the most amount of money possible. So I'm like, a waiter helps me do that. So I'll become a waiter, a bartender, whatever. And I said, okay, well, what's the next thing that pays the most amount of money? It's a consultant. Okay, well, I want to travel. Okay, I want to do this. So like, aligning your decisions with where you want to go. So, if you want to grow a business and you say, I want to be $100 million, I want to have a leadership team that's highly engaged. I want to make sure that we're the number one, producer of this. I want to make sure that our processes are calm, Then you say, okay, great. Here's where I'm at. Here's where I want to go. Like, where's the gap? And so it's the hard part is the execution, Ryan. To your point, is there are hundreds, thousands of decisions to make, but the work is doing the decisions. The easy part is aiming. If you've ever heard the expression ready, fire, aim, a lot of entrepreneurial organizations shoot first before trying to figure out where they want to go. And so you're going to spend more time, money, energy. So the first step is aiming. And the second step is continually making those decisions to get there. And the way we look at it is kind of vision is long term. For us, it's 3 years. In some organizations, it might be 5, 10 years. Then we get down to strategic priorities, which is kind of like 10,000 feet, which is, hey, where do we need to focus over the next, 12 to 18 to 24 months? So we're kind of like breaking it down. And then we get to the level of goal, and goals are typically 12 months, but they can extend down. And then you get into actions, which are, the things you do on the weekly, monthly, quarterly. So it all should align so that you have like where you're going big picture, where you're going kind of middle ground, because those are the most important things you need to focus on. What are the goals and actions so that you're measuring success? So the difference between being busy and being productive, it's like, did I make a lot of sales calls today, or did I make 20 sales calls? Did I go to the gym a lot, or did I go to the gym 3 times a week for 6 months? Did I lose weight? Well, that could be an ounce, or that could be 10 pounds before Christmas. I'm not suggesting anybody does that. Just saying that by bringing specificity into the work that you do everywhere, it'll help you be more successful. And then the rub, and I'll shut up in a second, the rub is with leadership teams and teams in general, they don't align on what good looks like. Let's raise a bunch of money. Well, does that mean $1 million or $20 million? Let's expand into new markets. Well, is it this market or that market? We need to communicate better. What does that actually mean? And so there's a lot of implied stuff with teams and probably with individuals. And where you can become excellent is making it explicit, clear, and have everybody agree to what it is.
Yeah. You've used the word a few times already, but alignment, you've written a book about it called Alignment. And it talks about, just the title is How to Get Your People, Strategy, and Culture on the Same Page. And let's go back to the oil tanker analogy. And let's just say, hey, you got a motor on one end and a motor on the other. And if they're both pushing in the different directions, the boat's not going anywhere. And so if your team's kind of not aligned, going down in the same path and have the same idea of what the MVP is or what you're working on, it's kind of hard to get them going in the same direction. Can you maybe talk about your book, maybe the writing process, and maybe some key concepts from the book?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be lying if I told you I knew everything that was in it, but I think the idea was
That AI bot got you good, didn't it?
No, I tell you, I mean, I wrote it. If you look at the back cover of the book, you'll see that I was a little bit younger. So I think I wrote it a little while ago. So it's my second book. I wrote one on entrepreneurship, on all the mistakes that I made, and I wrote one on strategic planning. And holistically, going back to like long-term vision, I wanted to make strategic planning accessible. I didn't want it to be reserved for like big four consultants. So Ryan, when you said this was explained simply, it's because it doesn't need to be expensive or complex. It needs to be simple. So I wrote it from the lens of a for-profit leader and a not-for-profit leader going through trying to get their jobs done, trying to be successful in the team, and really like putting myself in their shoes to like, what are they dealing with when they're trying to like lead people? And the process was really just trying to explain, hey, what are the things that I would want a leader to think about? And we walk through our alignment program steps to say, hey, here's what I need to do. I need to look internally in terms of what I'm doing well. I need to look externally in terms of where's the world going? If you think of Blockbuster and Netflix, they were in the same business. One leveraged technology, one didn't. And so you can't build your strategy in a vacuum. Anyways, here's where we want the organization to be. How do I get my people bought into that? How do I make sure that I build a plan that makes sense and that works? And then how do I get them in there? And so the writing process was just, at the time, I was writing like a monster. We used to have 40,000 people a month visit our blog because that's all I did, because I just wanted to get the idea of strategy, the idea of strategic planning into the hands of these people. And we have readers from all over the world. You think of, I think you guys are in the middle of the US, maybe Iowa or something like that. But you think in like the world, there are people trying to lead organizations with like nothing, with no money, but it makes a big deal to those people. So I was like, hey, get the content there so that you can have an impact. And that's how, as SME Strategy and I as a leader, can change the world. I believe strategic planning is my way of changing the world.
Yeah, no, I love that. And one of the things I wanted to touch on too, as you're talking a little bit about that process, or this stands out to me as a problem, and I imagine as a consultant, you may see this somewhat regularly, although maybe you're dealing with more sophisticated clients at this point. But when we go to actually sit down and think about our strategy, like you mentioned at the top that, you're not the gazillionaire you set out to be, right? And I wonder if part of that is either overestimating or underestimating what we're actually capable of achieving. And so this is a little bit of a goal setting exercise or discussion, and a little bit of a prioritization discussion, and a little bit, it sort of touches on all these different buckets. But can we talk a little bit about how to avoid, I guess, overestimating or making too grand of plan? Because it's one thing to say, oh, well, I want to be, starting my own rocket ship company with Bezos. Maybe that's too much for my little design agency this year. You know what I mean? So it's like, so how do we make sure that we're not aiming too high, but at the same time, not necessarily talking ourselves out of, taking a moonshot or really going for something big?
Okay. So the biggest bane of my existence as a facilitator is leaders that refuse to set goals because of the possibility of failure. As in, I'm not going to set a target because what if I'm wrong? And so I will set no target, which means I guarantee that I will fail versus potentially failing. Okay, so that's like setting an actual measurable target. And while I have failed quite a bit, I'm hella successful. I'm successful because of my failures. I'm successful because I had my moonshot. So the failure where people conflate is they view it as a failure of self. As in, I set this goal, ambitious or not, and I didn't get it. Therefore, I am a failure. And so people have like morality wrapped up to it. A lot of the work that we do is on organizational behavior and psychology, not just the strategy work. Whereas the fallacy is a failure of action. And so there's the fine line between a SMART goal, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. So if it is not realistic or it is not achievable, as in I'm going to partner with Jeff Bezos and start up a rocket ship company in the next 3 weeks, well, that's not achievable. It's just too short of a time. Whereas if I say, hey, I could do that over 30 years, why not? Like, why couldn't I not do that? And I would say that rocket ships company does $100 million of business. It is specific. It is measurable. It is achievable. Is it realistic? Well, who's to say? And is it time bound? Yes. So like, why not? So my failures were I didn't sell $1 million worth of stuff every year for a decade. I didn't fail because the goal was wrong. I failed because I didn't take sufficient action, whether that was laziness, whether that was I prioritized something else, whatever. But if you look at a macro level, there are senior leaders and there are entrepreneurs who go out and they raise the $20 million. To us, me, you might say, oh, I could never do that. Well, why not? Of course you can. It's just like, do you want to? Do you want to bad enough? And does it make sense? To me, it never made sense to raise $20 million. Therefore, that was not my goal because I didn't want a ginormous business. I wanted a chill business where I could go watch baseball and have an impact in the lives of people and travel around.
I love that you said that. Yeah. A lot of people get this grandiose idea that they have to have, the C-suite with the 100 employees underneath them and their, whatever, just that I've got to go all the way or nothing at all. And your point to being happy with where you're at and being okay with, what you want instead of Instagram's version of what you think you want, because, it's like setting the, I don't know. I just see it a lot where people just, they want this huge thing, but they could be happy with just, a regular house instead of the multi-million dollar, whatever. It just example.
Yeah. I mean, no shame on anybody's game, right? I think it's and the word I wrote down, it's a definiteness of purpose, right? So I knew where I wanted to be in 20 years. So that was my course.
Yeah.
If I didn't have that destination, and even if I did, there was you and I, all three of us are probably around the same age. So when you started growing up, you saw Mark Zuckerberg, who's in college and is making billions of dollars and all these social media companies. And then you feel like a dumb idiot for playing Call of Duty or whatever. You're like, well, that's just not your jam. But for me, I knew that's where I was going. When I was dating folks, I'm happily married, 2 kids now. I didn't worry that, I was unattractive or folks didn't want to rock with me because I knew I had my plan. I was so sure of where I wanted to go because I mapped it out that I didn't let other stuff distract me. And again, I think that's the challenge with entrepreneurs is if they don't have a clear direction of where they're going, they will have shiny object syndrome. They will start getting distracted by every squirrel and they will slow down on their path to getting to where they want to go. So that's my advice to everybody is figure out where you want to go, be 100% like committed to it, take steps. And if you're not taking steps, you're walking away.
Yeah,
I
I
think both
find
of
I
you
have
raise a
that
good point.
problem. Oh,
Yeah, me too. Yeah,
uh,
Mike knows. God knows.
I was going to say I have that problem come up a lot in software. As I'm learning a new tech stack or a new feature comes out, now I want to play with this feature over here more than I want to finish the project that I initially intended to start. And so that happens to me all the time. And at this point in my software journey, I'm actually okay with that because I still want to try and find out what feature sets are available before I can even put all those feature sets together for the project that I want. And like today, or currently I'm studying authentication. You know, it's the log in, log out, the verification email, the two-step, all that stuff. There's options out here that are plug and play, and then there's the option of building it yourself and having the customization. And after messing around for 3 weeks on the option of trying to, customize it and do it myself, I've come to the conclusion that I'm just going to take the easy solution and pay the fee for the already finished project, because authentication is a little bit more than I want to handle and I need to get the project out. So stuff like that, you'll take a 2 or 3 week detour sometimes, but sometimes those 2 or 3 week detours are necessary to get a clear picture on what you need and where you're going. So
Yeah,
yeah,
sometimes. What I would say is like distinct from the feature is like, what is the outcome? If you're clear
exactly.
on the outcome, it'll help you make that decision faster. And a story I tell often, and I know Ryan, you wanted to share something, is, one time I was driving to an appointment. I knew more or less where I was going to go. I didn't turn my maps on, whatever. I drive, it's about 10 minutes away, no big deal. I'm going and I'm like, oh, dang, I missed my turnoff. No big deal. Next one's just around the corner. So instead of it being a 10-minute trip, it was a 12-minute trip. Who cares, right? 2 minutes. But if you think about that on like a macro scale, that's 20%.
Yeah,
So imagine if every project that you went on was 20% over budget over time. That $100,000, or in some cases, the folks I work with, $1 million, $10 million initiatives, that's $2 million in cash
sure.
burned. If they're working with hundreds of employees, that's 20% wasted salary. And so you don't think of those small things, but those small things are really the ones that add up when you're unclear of like, hey, here's the outcome. But to your point, it's not a detour if you needed to have the learning. And I think that people discount the journey because they get so stuck on the destination as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, no. Well, and if I'm learning one thing from this conversation so far is that the whole thing is really personal, right? And like using Mike's example as one, in his case, he was comfortable with the version of getting to his project that he's building where he felt like it was totally fine to allocate some time and energy to, trying to learn a little about authentication and understand all that stuff. And honestly, it'll probably make him stronger in the end, even though he's, now decided to use like one of these pay options. He has got some fundamental knowledge of how authentication works and how that's going to, be serviced by this tool that he chose and all these kind of stuff. Right. So he's maybe making a better decision or a more informed decision because he took the time to study. Where maybe in some cases, the other end of that extreme is, if Mike was so focused on getting to market, he might go, you know what, this will shave 2 weeks off my deal. Let's just, I'll go ahead and throw in this authentication thing and we'll just move forward. So, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is that things can maybe be a little bit more flexible than we give them credit for. And so I think it's good to plan and all that kind of stuff, but we can also maybe allow ourselves a little bit of grace, understanding that we can make decisions and nothing is so permanent. So like, let's say he chooses, for sake of argument, Facebook authentication for this app he's building. And he goes, well, wait a minute, everybody that's on Facebook are older and boomers. And, I want a young audience, so we're going to switch over and we're going to use Instagram authentication instead.
It's hilarious.
So he might make a decision like that where he says, well, for my audience, Facebook gets us across the line. We could use this Facebook authentication to get people into the application, but it's not the best option. So we'll circle back later and make that fix. And I think a lot of times people, when they're trying to get to that goal, it's, hey, I'm driving from here to Los Angeles. They don't necessarily want to do that, swing wide and stop and see the world's biggest ball of yarn on the way. But, maybe on the way home, I will. maybe it'd be cool to see that little ball of yarn. I'm going to pull off and check that out next time. And that can be my decision or my audible. I'm willing to add 30 minutes to my drive so I can pull off and see this roadside attraction.
Yeah. It's harder if you have a car full of people to do that. And then how do you make those decisions? So the kind of two ideas, like concepts that I'd have your listeners think about, and some of these might be obvious ones that they already know, is the idea of MVP, like minimal viable product. Like, what is good enough for now that we can move on? Generally speaking, people say like make decisions fast and like clean up your mistakes. Amazon has or Elon, somebody has a like level 1 or level 0. Like, one is irreparable, one is easily fixable. So make those easily fixable decisions faster. But the biggest one is opportunity cost. Is like, yes, you did take that 2-3 weeks. And Mike, we're not trying to pick on you here on this one. There's senior leaders who do this like literally all day long. Well, what is the opportunity cost of that 2 weeks? What could I have done instead? If I don't spend $100,000 here, where can I spend it? If I don't go to this meeting, what else could I do? If I don't work on this project, I say most people don't say no enough because they think that saying no is I won't do this. What they don't think about is by saying no to a thing, I say yes to something else. I say no to this party invitation so I can work on my business. I say no to figuring out the best authentication app so I can spend 2 weeks selling. So it's like opportunity cost of those decisions. And the bad teams make no decisions. The bad teams talk about things on end and they just spin around in circles. So 3 months, 5 months, 8 months later, they're still talking about the same stuff where they could have just picked something that was good enough, moved on, and then iterated. So it's like instead of trying to pick the best one.
Countless stories of people in, startups who think they have one product, and in the development process, they actually realize, oh, this feature set over here is actually more interesting and generating more traffic than our actual MVP that we were going for. And they actually pivot and don't even have the same app at the end of the day because that key little bit actually makes more sense as a business. And that happens all the time. And just being able to do those micro actions to get the ball moving is what opens that up to begin with. So until you actually start making forward momentum towards something, you don't know what's going to come up and what's going to change things as time progresses. So,
got to be on the field. Yeah. Otherwise you're in the stands.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. And actually, I wanted to maybe start talking about sort of the step-by-step of how we build a process or start to develop a strategy that works for us. I mean, obviously, we've covered a lot of ground in terms of, the flexibility of a plan or, like what Mike was just talking about, being able to sort of pivot or make realizations about your business as you proceed. Maybe you think you knew something and you planned for it and all that stuff, only to find out that maybe it wasn't what you wanted to do. But you also touched on something just a moment ago that for me, I struggle with quite a bit, which is this idea of ideation versus execution. Like, I tend to be the guy that has a lot of good, what I perceive as being good ideas for businesses. And then because my experience is in marketing and design and things like that, I'm really good about building, putting a logo on it and building the brand around it and creating some assets for it and all that stuff. But then it just kind of dies on the vine because there's not really a business there. Rather, I've come up with an idea and I've designed a logo for it, but so it looks like a business, but it's not a business. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so, so in my case, I'm sort of guilty of maybe over ideating and under executing on some of these different ideas. And some of that is exactly what you were talking about earlier, the shiny toy thing, right? Like, ooh, this is a good idea. I want to chase this down. So I do the things that I'm capable of doing easy, the light lift for me, which is throwing a brand on something or whatever. And then the actual heavy lift of going out and doing the work, or now we have a new product to sell or whatever, is kind of where I start to fall apart. And so I wonder,
can I offer a potential different way of thinking about it?
I would love that.
Maybe you're not ideating enough. Ooh. So maybe you are shooting before you fully aim because like you're getting to the point where versus getting to the point where you don't know, which is, yes, I could make a brand on here. And I'm in startup. People are like, let's spend 10K on a website. It's like, but you don't have a business. Like, you don't have a business plan. So like, you're potentially, and again, this is just for you to take and here, there, and I'll go back to the practical steps, is what I heard you say was, I jump into doing before I've fully fleshed out if there's a business model here.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too, that sometimes it's not just that there isn't a business model. Like I may even have a product or whatever that's ready to go, but when it comes down to the processes of, putting this thing into production or actually getting something out to market or whatever, like I tend to fall apart at that stage.
Got it.
Right. So there's, so I would say that, yes, of course I could continue ideating, and maybe I'd even talk myself out of some of these ideas if I really did.
Yeah.
So to your point about maybe I'm not thinking enough, that might be one solution, is actually if, I think I have this really great idea. Well, let me think about it a little more and decide if I actually want to do it. So maybe additional ideation is a solution.
Yeah, and I apologize. I wasn't trying to like fix it.
No.
I say it from like a guy who has had 10 or 15 startups, like those shiny object ideas. Like I've built more stuff that people don't want to buy than I can count. Right. And then one of my buddies gave me really good advice. He's like, because I would take odd jobs. Like if I showed you how many business cards I had, and the thing is like, build something, sell something that people want to buy, not something that you have to convince them. And to me, that was like a big aha, because I was like, shit, you're right. I've been like really selling. And sure, it's okay. But like, do people really need it? And so, we talked about strategic plans and call a strategic plan for like a more established organization. But like brass tacks is like, make a business plan. Like do the work of saying, is there enough of a market? Can I get product market fit? Do the value proposition thing. Like ask people if they want this. Ask for some sum of money and say like, will you pay $10? It's normally $100. Would you pay $10? If you can get the $10, you have something. If they're like, even at 90% off, I'm still not going to pay for it. Nobody gives a shit. Pardon my French. And so like that to me has been the learning, not for like, here's what you should do, right? It's like people don't want the stuff that I was trying to buy. And I like the product market fit is the thing that kills businesses. Like getting product market fit before you run out of money. And then the second piece on like a personal level is really making sure that like it connects to where you want to go. Is this a cool business idea, or is it really going to support me as like a human being in terms of like what I want for my life, what I want for my work? Like, yeah, I could do it, but should I do it? And even now I am faced with decisions of like, hey, I could do management training. It's a conversation we literally had. Like, yes, I want to do management training. We have all of the content already. I know that people want it. My competitors are doing it. And I'm saying no to it, even though it's a good idea, even though it could make me money, because it's going to take me away from my like core thing. And so it sucks because you're like, hey, there's a pile of money here, but I know that if I go to this pile of money, it's going to take me away from my bigger pile of money, or it's going to make life harder for my employees, or it's going to increase the complexity. We do one thing, kind of like when you say, hey, you can have any color you want of a Ford as long as it's black. It's like, here's our agenda. Here's our process, because I am lazy and I wanted my work to be lazy. We don't do custom stuff because it takes too much work. And so for me personally, it was important. Whereas other people want complexity. They want to do a different thing every time. But for me, I was like, hey, I want to do one thing. I want to do it well. I want to do it easy. I want people to be able to mail me a check. By the way, if folks want to do strategic planning with SME Strategy, you can talk to us about that. You can mail us a check and we'll do a strategic planning session with you. But for us, I knew that I'd rather do a thing really, really well that I knew that I'd be able to do until I was 60, 70, 80 versus potentially doing social media at the time because it was what the cool kids were doing.
Yeah. So I think that all makes sense.
So you focus on strategic planning for any type of business, or do you have a specialty that you focus on? Is there like an ideal client that you pursue?
Yeah. And Ryan, I know if you wanted me to go through the steps, happy to do that. But for us, it started as like small and medium-sized businesses. That's why it's called SME Strategy. And now like our ideal client is, $10 to $500 million in revenue, which is obviously a very large gap, but not startups. Because we've given them they could have the best plan, but if they don't stick with it, it doesn't work. And so we're also expensive. So we want to make sure that they get value, but we work across industries. I could tell you about all the random organizations that we work with. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And we work across Canada, the US, and internationally.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, if you don't mind, Anthony, let's take a minute and kind of go through that process. Even though you're not working with startups anymore, I imagine that, a lot of your learnings came on the backs of startups or even through your own startups. And so maybe we could talk a little bit about just sort of, the process of developing a strategy that we can execute against, and we've talked about some different aspects, like avoiding overestimation or getting caught up in ideation and some of these other things, and actually executing. But for you, like, what are the steps if somebody came to you, and obviously you're dealing with much bigger fish these days, and maybe you can even take us through the process of, let's say, a $10 million organization, maybe somebody at the lower end of your spectrum, what does that guy come to you looking for? And then how do you guys help facilitate it?
So whether it's a $10 million organization or a $500 million organization or a $1 billion organization, this process is the same. It's always the same. What I would say, and it's fundamentally the same as writing a business plan for a startup. It's just less dynamic in a sense. So if you're a startup, if you're a new business, if you're kind of like under $1 million, I say, like, go back to the foundation, just Google business plan template, do the work. Where I see entrepreneurs like skipping out as they hire a business plan writer. I have written business plans for people. The work is thinking about the questions, not getting it on paper. So like, Mike, your exploration of, can't remember what we were talking about. Like, that was the work was uncovering it, not just having somebody do it. But it's 5 steps. Okay. And if you Google strategic planning agenda, will come up first, and then you'll be able to like get all of the nuance to it. Okay. So first step, where are we now? So for us, that includes celebrating basically how we got to where we are. We do a SWOT scan, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, so that everybody on, again, in this case, it's typically a leadership team, can be aligned on the same page in terms of where we're at. Do you think this is going well? Do you not think this is going well? Why do you think that? So it's all about alignment. And then we do a PESTLE analysis. And PESTLE stands for political, economic, societal, technological, environmental, and legal. And that is where we've looked inside our organization. Now let's look outside of the organization. Let's look at what's happening in the world around us. Where is the world going to be in 3, 5, 10 years? We only look 3 years, but fundamentally it's the same. When I started my business, I did this process for myself, and I had a hypothesis. My hypothesis was that when I was 20 something, there was going to be a bunch of baby boomers that had occupied senior leadership positions for a very long time, 10, 20 years, that when they retired or quit or died, that the people coming behind them would have no idea how to be managers. And so I said, because this is where the world is going, and because all of this change is happening, I think I will be positioned to be successful. So far I'm right, but I could have been wrong. So current state. Then we say, where do we want to go? What does success look like to us? And for that, it looks like vision. So 3-year vision, not a vision statement, but like, if we were totally successful today's date, 3 years from now, what would it look like? And you can do this for yourself personally. If I was 100% successful, what would all of it look like? Like, I took a time machine and described it. As well as mission. Mission is like purpose. Who are we? What do we do? Who do we do it for? Nonprofit organizations are mission focused, so they might find it more comfortable to flip. But really, it's why do we exist, and who cares if we weren't there? What do we do, and who's the number one person we serve? I'm happy to go more into any of those, but we'll say current state, future state. Then what is going to get in the way? For us, we do a risk register, which is looking at everything that might get in the way, so that we can anticipate those roadblocks versus getting smashed by them. Remember, I told you about getting embezzled. That was a risk that I didn't anticipate, so I help people avoid it. And then within that, we also talk about values and behavior, culture. It's been said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Like, the people side will destroy the best plan. So really focusing on the people side of things as well as the tactical side of things. That's why the document doesn't make a difference. Where are we now? Where are we going? What's going to get in the way? Next is, what do we do? What do we prioritize? So that's setting high-level strategic priorities. The philosopher Ron Swanson, if you know who that is, said, don't half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing. And so many organizations take on 10 strategic priorities. They try to do 10 things a little. Imagine if you have 100% of your time, money, energy, you're focused on 10 different things. That means that 10% of your time, money, energy, plus switching cost, you're not really making any progress on anything. So what we recommend is find 3 buckets, spend a third of your time in each of those, make significant progress, accomplish it, and then move on to the next thing. The challenge with teams is that if you're working in an executive team of 10 people and everybody has a different idea of what the priority is, and you have 7, 8, 9 priorities, and you have to roll that out to hundreds of people, the likelihood for misalignment is huge. It's catastrophic.
What are some principles or things that you would recommend for someone who is working in a team and getting everyone in the same alignment? I'm sure it's effective communication, but a game of telephone in a business doesn't end well.
Oh yeah. I mean, my short answer is do a strategic planning session, decide on what those strategic priorities are. Hire me. Yeah. Or my team, of course. Okay. So I'll answer that and then I'll kind of go back. In most organizations, many organizations, and I've done hundreds of these offsites, they have 7 or 8 possible priorities. And it's less about what is the best one, and it's more about what is the one that we're going to choose. Like there are clear, obvious best ones. You're like, okay, this is our top of all of the 8. Here's the 1 of 1. That one's usually a slam dunk. 2 of 8. That one's usually pretty easy. And then once you get to the third one, you're like, well, it's kind of a toss up between this or this. Just fucking flip a coin. And pardon my guys, flip a coin and pick it, because it doesn't matter. It matters that you choose, like ultimately. But it's basically just talking about it and choosing. The worst thing you could do is just assuming that everybody knows what it is. Happy to go more into that. But so where are we now? Where are we going? What's going to get in the way? What do we need to do to mitigate that risk? I didn't cover that part. It's not we're just arbitrarily picking it. It's saying we already know what's going to get in the way of us getting to this place. So where we need to focus is on making those roadblocks less. Okay. So we know that for us to be able to grow into a global brand, we need exposure. Right? Or what's going to get in the way is people don't know who we are. Therefore, our strategic priority is make sure people know who we are, because that's the biggest roadblock. Often, people stick with what they know and is closest to them versus what they need to really prioritize. Said another way, they do wants-based prioritization versus needs-based prioritization. I have a hose, and in front of me is the grass. I could water the grass with my hose, and it's closest, and I know how to do that. Meanwhile, there's a burning building. My house is on fire. It would be easier, closer to put the water on the grass, but actually what I really need to do is put out the house. And most people don't think about prioritization in terms of impact or likelihood or urgency and importance. So where are we now? Where are we going? What's going to get in the way? Setting strategic priorities to mitigate that. And then from there, cascading that into goals and objectives. And then fundamentally, how are we going to implement this? How do we stay on top of it? Not only what are the tasks that we're going to do week in, month in, quarter in, but how are we going to make sure that we stay on top of our plan? When we do these strategy offsites, they're kind of 2 or 3 days. And I say, okay, you've got a 3-year plan. Which is greater? 3 days of planning or the 1,100 days of implementation? Resource appropriately. And most people over-resource the planning and under-resource the implementation because it's a long frickin' time to stay focused. And so setting up like mile markers along the way to keep your team on track and then manage changes as they go. You guys remember in 2019, there was a little COVID?
I blocked that out. Like anything.
Perfect. Most people did. So, if you made your plan during that time, it wouldn't make any sense to keep the same plan, right? Because the world has changed. And so that's why like strategic planning needs to be adaptive. It's not the document. It's really like a living document, a living process to align the team. So anyways, I kind of went on a tangent, not a tangent. It's what you guys asked, but I'm obviously very passionate. I could talk for hours about it, but hopefully
I think it's really useful. I mean, trying to parse, I guess, the flexibility in the plan, right? Being able to adapt, like you just mentioned. Also, like how rigid do we need to be? How hard do we need to stick to the plan? Right. Because I mean, some of it, maybe we are sticking to the plan, but it gets hard. So then we start to deviate, and so, trying to, I guess, parse those couple things and then figure out, how to break things down into smaller chunks. Like, so one of the, the sample you used was, hey, not everybody knows about us. So our goal is go out and let everyone know about us. Well, go out and let everyone know about us means a lot of things, right? Is that direct mail? Is that social media? Is that doing podcasts? Is that, all these different strategies for trying to accomplish, knocking down that particular roadblock. So once you have sort of I guess I think used the metaphor of sort of the 30,000 foot view, where you have this top level idea, which is, okay, well, we know that our biggest stumbling block is that people don't know us as broadly as they should. So our goal is to make that somehow better. We want to improve. And I suppose maybe you do this by slapping some metrics on it, okay, if we get 10 extra visitors or, whatever it is. But, so maybe you can help us understand that, like how you might take sort of an ambitious goal like that. Like, I'm trying to spin up a little brand right now, and we're trying to set some goals around, how many accounts do we need to sell to make this, pay for itself. And so in this case, we have the same roadblock you do. We have to go and introduce ourselves, and people don't know who we are, and we're kind of inventing a new thing that people don't do commonly. So how do we let people know that this is a big thing that they should do and that they should consider doing it? And there's 1,000,001 different ways to skin every cat. So how do we start to make decisions and then act against them?
Because you do not care about how you skinned the cat. You care that the cat is skinned. So that, like, intellectually is a big shift, because people get so focused on the how, they forget about the why.
Yeah.
And one of my coaches says, like, Mike Tyson has this like knockout punch idea. Why throw a bunch of punches if I only need to throw one? So what I would have you think about is, okay, well, let's say we want more people to know about us. What does that mean and why? Do we really want more people to know about us? Or are we trying to get a revenue? Like, if only 2 people know about us, but we make 100 grand, do we want to be famous, or do we want to be rich and or profitable? And so when you can get rid of like the fluff nonsense, that's when you become very effective. Now, let's say it is critical. Like, the goal is to get 10,000 new customers. And I say, great. If the goal is to get 10,000 new customers, then I say, what is the path that I need to take to get 10,000 new customers? I could knock on their door one by one. I could put out LinkedIn ads. I could put Instagram ads. I could do whatever. And I say, what is going to be the straightest, most direct trajectory to get there? And then, like, is that customers that buy a $5 thing or a $5,000 thing? What if I only sold to one customer that bought 5,000 versus 1,000 $5 customers? For the purposes of my exercise, is that good enough? And so, like, asking the question why a whole bunch of times will help you get rid of shiny stuff. Like, people who jump to social media. It's like, well, sure, social media can be good, but why social media? And what does good look like? As a team, getting really clear about what good looks like. So that's why setting the right metrics. The other kind of short answer is the difference between leading and lagging indicators. A lagging indicator is outcomes-based. A leading indicator is activity-based. If you only have lagging indicators, like I did when I failed a bunch of times, said I want to have $1 million, but I didn't have enough correlation to what I needed to do. If I want $1 million, that means I need to talk to 10,000 people and sell them something that costs $1,000. And then I would have had actually like an action plan. I know I want to lose 20 pounds. Great. Does knowing I want to lose 20 pounds make a difference? Or does saying my leading indicator of going to the gym 3 times a week for 60 minutes? I believe that if I go 3 times a week for 60 minutes, I will get there. A month later, no results are happening. I said, okay, what else do I need to change? Well, I stop eating a pint of ice cream every week. Okay, another leading indicator. So it's like building the sum of all the activities to get the result. But you have to be outcomes focused versus activity focused. Otherwise, you're going to be moving fast in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Well, Anthony,
and Ryan, happy to chat more about that to support you with that, because it's a problem that everybody faces.
Well, no, it's true. And just like, as we're talking about it, thinking about some of these things, you mentioned asking why a bunch of times. And I've actually written on, and I read, somebody else's take on basically what they call the 5 whys, right? Which is, basically just doing that. And it seems like kind of a funny little exercise, but if you actually try it on anything, By the time you get to the fourth or fifth why, you're like, what are we doing here? Like, of course not, or whatever, it's like, but like, it's actually pretty challenging to get to that fourth or fifth why. Cause after one or two rounds of careful consideration, you go, oh, what are we doing?
Yeah, why do I want a logo?
Yeah,
I guess we want people to know. Anyways,
it's an interesting point, and it's just another one of those things I think that seems simple, but people get caught up in it. And one of the things too that I sort of think, and it's actually something Mike and I have kind of discovered in doing the show, is the sort of, I think what we think is kind of the reason most people don't act is sort of what you described earlier at the top, which was they're afraid to do something for fear of failing. And, and so we think that fear is actually the bigger motivator in a lot of these things, or the reason we don't get things done is kind of a fear-based thing, and people, dress this up in a number of different ways. Oh, I'm just too much of a perfectionist, so nothing ever gets done or whatever. But what it really is that you're kind of afraid to take that step, or you don't want to fail or whatever it is. And so here in sort of our dying minutes, do you have any kind of advice for the people who, maybe aren't taking the progress or the steps they should, maybe, aren't doing the things that they ought to be doing in their own business just because maybe they're afraid at the end of the day? Because like, as we've gone through your process here, I mean, and not to diminish it or anything, but I mean, it's like, none of this is like truly rocket science, right? I mean, we're not actually trying to get to Mars here. A lot of it really is just slow down and think. And so, have you come across this, maybe not so much nowadays, but in your earlier life, as you were beginning your consultancy, did you see more of this in people, and what are the steps that you give them to try and alleviate this?
Okay. So my hot take on this, and I'll leave you two things and then we'll finish up. So one is back in the day, and I say back in the day, modern day survival was not getting eaten by a dinosaur. That was like survival. Okay. Modern day survival is don't look stupid. So it's not actually just fear of failing. It's the fear that you are going to look stupid. And that's the thing that gets in the way of people. Even if it's like totally imagined in your brain, you're like, well, somebody's going to know that I made this startup and they're going to come back to me 20 years ago and make fun of me. It's like, no, it's just fear of looking stupid. And so that's why people don't do anything, because they don't want to look stupid, whether it's to themselves or imaginary other people. So my quote, please quote me, is the benefit of the future needs to be greater than the pain of change. Okay. The benefit of the future needs to be greater than the pain of change. If you go to the doctor and the doctor says, Mike, Ryan, you guys have to stop eating chocolate or you're going to get really, really sick. You'll be like, forget that jazz. I love chocolate. I'm not going to stop eating because I don't care. I'm willing to keep being sick. And people do that with dairy all the time. And for some reason, you guys both are jointly going to a doctor's appointment and the doctor says, don't eat chocolate or you will die. You will probably stop eating chocolate or whatever vice you have. And so if you told yourself, well, if I don't do this idea, my family's not going to be supported. I'm going to be poor. I'm not going to be able to help people. I'm going to have to work as whatever the worst thing is. You say, oh shit, I should probably get off my butt and do the thing. So you just don't have sufficient motivator to get you to move. Institutionally, that says, hey, if we don't implement this new idea, our competitor is going to, destroy us. So the benefit of the future has to be greater than the pain of change. Otherwise, you will make no change in your life, personally or professionally.
Love it.
No, I love that. And I think that's a great thing to sort of end on. I think, a lot of us could sort of benefit from that. And I think you're right that like you kind of have to feel the pain. And it's funny, like I was just having a conversation earlier about this new little startup. We're talking about bringing somebody on board. And, generally speaking, we use contract labor and stuff like that to try and keep costs down. Sometimes we'll offshore things like that. But we have an opportunity to bring on a good person in the company. But it sort of requires paying a real live American wage and making sure that this person can eat and feed her kids. And in our discussion with her, it was like, well, this is a big change. Like, it doesn't feel like it should be, right? I mean, we're just trying to find a person to do a job. But for our organization, which has been built on freelance support and things like that over the years, this changes our dynamic from, sometimes work goes up, sometimes work comes down, things like that, to a model where, well, we have to have consistent revenue. If we're going to pay this person X number of dollars, in salary, we've got to make sure that we can always pay that, right? It can't be, like with freelance help where, well, we're busy this month, we're not busy that month, And so it's really changing the way we're thinking. So it's funny, some of the things you've been mentioning are really hitting close to home just because of this conversation this morning. And, but I think it further illustrates kind of what you're talking about. For me, the benefit of bringing on this person is, yes, it's good for the business. It's good for that person. It gives us the opportunity to do good things for them. But the change part is going to be a challenge. I mean, we're going to have to change the way we do business, but ultimately the benefit of that will be better than the change. And, so I think we can actually live up to your quote with this one. Now there's some brass tacks that we'll have to figure out, and that'll be going back to the strategic buckets that we were talking about moments ago, where we see if we can actually make it happen. But it was a new way of thinking this morning that is not something that we've done in the past. So I think it's kind of interesting that we had.
It's called a breakthrough. That's a breakthrough, baby.
Yeah. Well, Anthony, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate this conversation. Can you tell people where they can reach out to find more about you and learn about your business?
Yeah, if you pretty much have any question about strategy or leadership, just Google it and then put SME strategy at the end. You probably don't even need to put SME strategy at the end, but if you do, it'll guarantee that you go to us. And then if you are doing, I want to get your executive team together for a strategy offsite, just put sample strategic planning agenda or SME strategy, and we can facilitate and lead your team through the process so that you can participate instead of having to leave. And the last thing is just connect with me personally on LinkedIn, Anthony C. Taylor, and just be happy to wrap with any of your people. And just guys, I just appreciate the conversation. You guys are awesome dudes, and I love what you're doing. So just keep it up.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Anthony. We really appreciate your time. And thanks so much to everybody who tuned into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.